Have you ever poured your heart and soul into building someone else's dream, only to be discarded when they finally reached the top? "Baby, wait before the baby's even born," said another. The words weren't just from strangers. They were shared, liked, and commented on by people she'd once considered family. They'd been divorced for only 6 months, and he'd wasted no time flaunting his new girlfriend on every platform possible. He had taken something sacred and turned it into ammunition. But now the tears came, hot and unrelenting. Her best friend Carla was the first to call. "Don't look at it," Carla urged. But Leia couldn't. The world didn't know their story. Ethan's new girlfriend, Tiffany, was everything Leia wasn't: blonde, petite, and obsessed with curated Instagram posts that showcased their perfect life. But what good would that do? They would just twist it against her. She could hear Ethan's voice in her head, "You always overreact, Leia." She put her phone down and pressed her palms into her eyes, willing herself to breathe. She wasn't just protecting her own pride anymore. There was a life inside her. And that life deserved a mother who didn't break under the weight of someone else's cruelty. And yet, something inside her shifted that night. And from that burn came a quiet, dangerous resolve. She wasn't going to beg him to stop. She wasn't going to hide. By morning, the storm online had turned into a flood. Leia kept the curtains drawn. "I won't beg him to take it down," Leia answered, her voice raspy. "They're beautiful," she said. They talked about options: a lawyer, a statement, reporting the posts. Each idea sounded small next to the size of the damage. They went for a walk because the apartment felt like a box. On the corner, a giant billboard floated above traffic. Some perfume brand, a woman in a silk dress under the words, "Own your story." Carla followed her gaze. "You're not thinking." Carla winced. Billboards cost a fortune. They turned. The man looked familiar, though Leia couldn't place him at first. He held a small terrier on a leash and wore a baseball cap like any other neighbor. "You're Leia Bennett," he said, not as a question. "You painted the pediatric wing mural at St. Luke's 3 years ago. My mother loved it. She sat under it during chemo. I never forgot your name." "Mr. Croft?" she asked. "I want my dignity back," Leia said. "And I want him to stop thinking women are furniture he can move around." He tapped his phone. "I know the company that owns most of the digital boards between Midtown and the West Side. If we move fast, we can play something by tomorrow at dawn. Let it be a trade. My foundation is building a new arts program for kids coming out of treatment. We need someone to lead it for a year. You take the job. I'll underwrite the board as project promotion." Carla squeezed Leia's arm. "This is real, Leia." Leia's first instinct was to refuse. Then she remembered Ethan's captions, the echo of strangers' laughter. She nodded once. "We do it with taste. No digs, no mud." The photographer, an old friend of Julian's, worked quickly and spoke softly. When they finished, the sun had fallen behind the skyline, and the city lights looked like 1,000 small prayers. At home, Leia brewed tea and waited. Her inbox chimed. The copy read, "Leia. Mother. Artist. Hope. Ethan." She turned the volume down and placed the phone face down on the table. She walked to the window and opened the curtain. Leia rested her palm on her belly and spoke softly, almost a promise. "We're going to be okay." At sunrise, the whole city would see her standing beside a man the internet would call her billionaire fiancé, and Ethan would finally realize the joke isn't on her anymore. Not because she lacked beauty, she had plenty of it, but because she carried it quietly, almost without realizing. Her dark hair, often twisted into a messy bun with a pencil jammed through it, smelled faintly of lavender shampoo. The apartment wasn't much, just enough room for a small bed, a thrifted couch, and a kitchen so narrow you had to turn sideways to open the fridge, but she had made it hers. The walls bloomed with her own paintings, sunsets over rooftops, wildflowers spilling from mason jars, portraits of strangers she'd passed on the street and never seen again. She'd sold a few pieces over the years, enough to cover rent during dry months, but most of her income had come from freelance illustration jobs, school murals, and odd creative gigs. Her father, a mechanic, taught her patience by having her hold the flashlight during long winter nights in the garage. Her mother, a seamstress, taught her the value of detail, how a stitch too loose or a seam slightly crooked could ruin an entire dress. From them, Leia inherited two things: stubbornness and pride in doing things well, even if no one noticed. Meeting Ethan had felt, at the time, like the universe stepping in. She'd been 22, just out of college with a portfolio she didn't know how to use. One project became another, and then another. They married 2 years later in a tiny ceremony under the oak trees at her parents' house. She picked up extra work painting storefront signs and illustrating children's books while he took meetings with investors. She believed in his dreams so much that she poured her savings into it without hesitation. But success changed Ethan. At first, it was subtle: longer hours, more business trips, fewer shared dinners. Then came the new clothes, the upgraded car, the invitations to networking events she wasn't welcome to attend. They weren't explicit at first, just inside jokes and late-night check-ins from someone named T, but the tone was unmistakable. A few weeks later, he told her about Tiffany as casually as if he were discussing the weather. She didn't tell Ethan right away. Something in her knew that the man he'd become wouldn't see it as a gift, but as an inconvenience. But Leia didn't have the energy for a drawn-out battle. In her new life, she kept things small and quiet. Her days were measured in brush strokes and cups of tea, punctuated by doctor's appointments and the occasional phone call from her mother checking in. She was the one who insisted Leia keep her maternity shoot appointment, even when Leia argued it felt silly to pose for photos alone. "You're not alone," Carla had said. "You've got that baby, and you've got me. We're doing this." The shoot had been simple: a rented studio with soft lighting, a few changes of clothes, and a photographer who spoke in gentle, encouraging tones. For a few hours, Leia felt almost normal, beautiful even. But cruelty was a language Ethan had learned fluently. The man who once brought her coffee in bed now brought strangers into their private moments, turning them into jokes for likes and shares. That wasn't about pettiness. But it wasn't charity that made her say yes. And maybe, just maybe, it was the fact that standing next to someone the public respected might shield her from the worst of the backlash. That night, after signing the paperwork for the arts program job, she lay awake in bed with the proof of the billboard glowing on her phone screen. She imagined the faces of the people who'd laughed at her online, seeing it for the first time. New York had always been a city of contradictions for Leia: loud but lonely, beautiful but unkind. Over the years, the city had given her inspiration, heartbreak, and a kind of resilience she never would have found anywhere else. Her Brooklyn neighborhood was far from glamorous. The sidewalks were cracked, the subway entrance smelled faintly of damp concrete, and the corner store owner always looked suspicious if you paid with large bills. From her window, she could see the rooftops and, on clear days, the faint silhouette of the Manhattan skyline. Morning tea, painting, lunch while watching old movies, an afternoon walk if she had the energy. Some days that thought warmed her. She didn't mind the trip. It gave her time to sketch the strangers she saw along the way: a man dozing with a bouquet in his lap, a teenager practicing lines from a play, an elderly woman knitting without ever looking down. He was stepping out of a black SUV in front of the hospital, holding the door for an older woman with a scarf tied neatly around her head. He didn't notice Leia, but she remembered the way he kept his hand on the woman's elbow, steady and sure, as they walked inside. Julian's world was nothing like hers. He lived in a penthouse overlooking Central Park, sat on boards of arts and health foundations, and was photographed at charity galas in tailored suits. But unlike most wealthy men she'd encountered through Ethan's business events, he didn't radiate arrogance. The Upper West Side itself felt like a different planet from her Brooklyn block. Wide, tree-lined streets, pre-war buildings with doormen, cafes that sold cappuccinos for the price of her weekly grocery bill. She'd sometimes linger there after appointments, wandering into bookstores or sitting on a bench just to watch the people pass by. This contrast between the quiet corners of her life and the glittering stage of the city was about to collapse into a single moment. The billboard, once it went up, would bridge those worlds. Everyone from her Brooklyn neighbors to the socialites of Midtown would see the same image, Leah standing tall, unashamed, reclaiming her own name. Buses roared. Street vendors called out deals on hot dogs. It was humbling and strange to feel on the verge of something life-altering while the rest of the world kept moving. But somewhere in that restless city, Ethan was still smiling, completely unaware that the ground beneath him was about to shift. She still went through her routines, painting, tea, walks, but each moment felt like holding her breath. "I know," Leah replied, slicing an apple. "I'm counting on it." There was no way he could miss it. Meanwhile, life in Brooklyn kept moving in its familiar, unpolished rhythm. The woman downstairs kept burning incense that smelled like sandalwood and cinnamon. These sounds and smells anchored Leah to the life she had built for herself, separate from Ethan's polished, performative world. They just asked her what she wanted people to feel when they saw it. "Hope," she'd said without hesitation. That night, Julian invited her to view the printing tests for the billboard at a studio in Midtown. Her face, her growing belly, blown up to a scale that made her step back. She half expected to feel exposed, maybe even embarrassed. Instead, she felt solid. There was a pause, the kind that didn't need filling. 2 days before the launch, rain slicked the streets and a heavy mist blurred the skyline. Leah stood at her window, watching droplets race down the glass. The thought made her smile. And somewhere across the river, in a glass-walled office he thought was untouchable, Ethan Bennett was about to watch his controls slip through his fingers. Ethan Bennett had always been good at controlling the room. In business, it was with tailored suits, handshakes that lingered just long enough, and the ability to make people believe he was already successful, even when his bank account said otherwise. But charisma without conscience was just manipulation in a sharper suit. His company, Bennett Solutions, had started small, consulting for mid-sized firms looking to modernize their branding and online presence. Ethan had endured enough failed pitches and sleepless nights to know how to play the long game. The truth, as Leah would discover, was that he liked the way he looked without her beside him. A man alone at a bar seemed available, interesting. It was a challenge to certain kinds of people, and Ethan thrived on that attention. That was how Tiffany entered the picture. She was 10 years younger, fresh from a job at a fashion PR firm, and perfectly in tune with the image Ethan wanted to project. Together, they became the kind of couple who curated their lives for social media, lavish dinners, beach vacations, expensive gifts, all documented with the precision of a marketing campaign. He had a knack for finding the soft spot in someone's confidence and pressing on it just enough to make them question themselves. With Leah, it was always disguised as teasing. "You'd be prettier if you dressed up more," he'd say. Or, "You really should think about toning up before the baby comes." Small comments, but over time, they worked like erosion. By the time their marriage ended, Leah barely recognized the woman she'd been when they met. Ethan, however, didn't look back. What Ethan didn't know was that the city he thought he owned was about to become the stage for his undoing. Ethan's confidence was not just arrogance, it was calculation. He believed people only remembered the last thing they saw. In his mind, perception was reality. If he looked successful, if he acted untouchable, then he was. Clients loved him, investors trusted him, and acquaintances envied him. In his eyes, she was no longer part of his story. At private dinners with friends, he'd make offhand comments about her, always with a smirk. Tiffany would laugh, tucking her hand into his arm like she'd just been told the most charming joke. She had no loyalty to Leia. Why would she? But Tiffany had her own motives. She enjoyed the attention Ethan's subtle cruelty generated. Every post that hinted at Leia without naming her got engagement, and engagement meant followers. Followers meant invitations, brand deals, and a step up in the world Tiffany had been clawing her way into. "You're playing with fire," she warned. "Public opinion turns fast, especially when there's a pregnancy involved." Ethan brushed her off. "Relax. People know I'm joking. Besides, who's going to side with her? She doesn't have a platform." In the days before the Billboard, Ethan was riding high. Bennett Solutions had just closed a deal with a major luxury brand. He felt untouchable. In truth, he wanted to finalize a deal for an office expansion. He passed through Times Square on his way home, glancing up at the screens with idle pride. Advertising was theater, and he considered himself one of its best directors. The irony, of course, was that the largest stage in the city was about to feature him, but not in the way he imagined. Because while Ethan believed he was writing the ending of Leia's story, she had already written the first line of his reckoning. At 6:12 a.m., a commuter waiting for the light on West 34th Street looked up, saw the massive digital billboard, and instinctively reached for their phone. Within minutes, it was shared across Instagram, Twitter, and TikTok. There she was, Leia, standing in that soft blue dress, one hand resting on her belly, her chin lifted just slightly toward the skyline. The text was simple: Leia. Mother. Artist. Hope. Beneath it, Community Arts Fund. Launching tomorrow. By 7 a.m., hashtags began trending: Leia Bennett, Mother Artist Hope, the Billboard. People who had never heard her name were suddenly debating her story over morning coffee. Others speculated wildly about Julian's role in her life. "Is this a soft engagement announcement?" one tweet asked. He walked into the building with a coffee in one hand, phone in the other, glancing over emails as he waited for the elevator. Then his assistant, nervously fidgeting with her tablet, stepped forward. "You might want to see this." Through the floor-to-ceiling windows at the end of the lobby, the billboard loomed in perfect view. For a moment, he didn't register what he was seeing. The elevator dinged, but he didn't step in. Every 15 seconds, there she was again, Leia, radiant and unshaken, with a man whose very name carried weight in the city's power circles. "Is this some kind of campaign?" he asked, his voice low. "Apparently," his assistant said carefully. "It's all over social media." Old acquaintances texted variations of, "Did you see this?" and, "Man, that's cold." Tiffany called twice, then sent a message dripping with suspicion: "Care to explain why your ex is on a billboard with Julian Croft?" Ethan didn't reply. People weren't laughing with him anymore. Carla was pacing, phone in hand, narrating the reaction online. "Leia, you're a phenomenon." The call went straight to voicemail. Ethan hung up, muttered a curse, and tried another number. This time, a groggy voice answered his PR head, "Dana. Then find out who bought it and tell them." "Tell them what?" Her tone sharpened. "That you're embarrassed. That your ex-wife is doing something positive with one of the most respected philanthropists in the city. You'll look worse if you touch it." Ethan's grip tightened around his phone. "I don't care how it looks. This is public." Tiffany arrived at the office around 10 a.m., storming in with sunglasses still on. "So, when were you planning to tell me that your ex is now whatever she is with Julian Croft?" "She's not with him," Ethan said flatly. "Then why does it look like she is?" "Because, babe, the entire internet thinks she just traded up in the biggest way possible." The jab landed harder than she probably intended. Ethan didn't answer. Tiffany muttered something about a lunch reservation and left, her heels clicking like punctuation marks across the floor. By noon, news outlets had picked up the story. In Brooklyn, Leia was already at the hospital for a meeting with the foundation team. It felt like a full-circle moment. You've seen the coverage. Then something else will take the spotlight. That's how the city works. I'm fine with that, she replied. Julian nodded. Then I'd say it worked. She let it ring out, the screen glowing with his name before fading to black. If Ethan couldn't control the narrative in public, he might just try to break her in private. But by the third morning, he switched tactics. The second came an hour later. You think Croft actually cares? He's using you for good PR. By noon, there were 6 more. Each one chipped at the edges of her calm, not because she believed him, but because she recognized the voice behind the words. She wanted to believe the worst was behind her, that the billboard had been the high point of her public stand. What if Ethan found a way to twist this? She'd seen how fast online sentiment could shift, how one misleading headline could rewrite the truth in hours. Carla noticed the change. What's going on in that head of yours? But the pressure didn't stop. Strangers dissected her motives, her looks, even her worthiness as a mother. Leia didn't cry, but the words sat heavy in her chest. She closed her laptop and walked to the window, watching the blur of headlights below. The city she had once drawn inspiration from now felt like it was pressing in on her, each building a silent witness to her unraveling. She told herself she'd sleep it off, but at 2 a.m., she was still awake, scrolling through her own name on social media. The caption beneath read, "Wishing everyone the best in love and life." And judging by the comments, it was working. Others compared the two women, reducing Leia and Tiffany to bullet points in a competition neither had agreed to enter. Leia closed the app and set her phone down with more force than necessary. She walked into the kitchen, filled a glass of water, and tried to drink away the lump in her throat. But the words from those comments followed her like shadows. The next morning, she skipped breakfast. "I'm tired, Carla," Leia replied. The crowd around her was laughing, pointing, their voices a blur. She woke up with her heart racing and the taste of panic in her mouth. Throwing on a coat, she walked the streets aimlessly until she found herself on the riverfront. The skyline glowed in the distance, the same skyline she'd faced in her maternity shoot. Only now it felt cold. Her phone buzzed. A text from an unknown number lit up the screen, "Meet me tomorrow. I think you should know something about Ethan." For a moment, she considered deleting it. Another trap. Another drama she didn't have the strength for. But the message was signed with a name she hadn't seen in years, Clara Vaughn. Clara had once been Ethan's business partner before they'd had a falling out. Leia didn't know the details, only that Clara had vanished from the company just before its biggest contract. Leia stood there in the wind, the city humming behind her, the water churning below. She felt the faint kick of the baby, like a reminder that she wasn't in this alone. She looked back at the message, her mind already turning. If Clara had a reason to contact her now, maybe it wasn't just about sympathy. And for the first time in days, Leia felt a spark of something she'd almost lost, the will to fight. Clara Vaughn walked in exactly on time. She looked older than Leia remembered, but not in a tired way, more like someone who had shed a weight she never needed to carry. Her hair was pulled back and her eyes were sharp. "Leia," she said, sliding into the booth. "You look stronger than I expected. I'm not here to gossip. What Ethan's been doing to you is disgusting, but it's not surprising. I came because I think you should know why I left Bennett Solutions." Leia leaned in, her fingers tightening around her cup. Clara's voice was steady. "Ethan didn't build that company alone. He didn't even build it, honestly. The contract that put him on the map, the one with Starkwell Tech, was secured because I brought in the lead. I negotiated it, managed the team, and got it signed. Ethan found a way to push me out right after. He planted documents in my email, making it look like I'd leaked client data. It wasn't true, but in our industry, just the accusation is enough. I could have fought it, but I didn't have the stomach for a legal war. So, I walked away. Leia felt her chest tighten. Why are you telling me this now? She thought about the baby, about how much she wanted to keep her life free from more public spectacle. What's in there? She asked quietly. This wasn't just dirt. Why not go public yourself? She asked. And as Leia stared at the folder between them, she realized the power she'd been missing might have just landed in her hands. Leia didn't touch the folder right away. Part of her wanted to shove it back toward Clara, to walk away before she crossed a line she couldn't uncross. But another part, quieter, stronger, knew she'd already crossed it the moment she agreed to meet. She opened the folder. The assistant who signed the statement, her name's Marcy, she'll swear she saw him do it. Leia traced the ink with her finger. It was almost surreal seeing physical proof of the kind of man Ethan really was. Whatever you think is right, Clara said. Clara warned her that if she moved forward, Ethan would fight back hard, lawsuits, smear campaigns, anything to make her regret it. She thought about the billboard, how it had given her back some control, how it had forced Ethan to see her as more than a shadow of his past. This was different. This was a weapon. Carla's eyebrows shot up. This is huge. If this gets out, he's done. I know, Leia said. Leia didn't answer right away. Carla nodded slowly. Then maybe it's time you stop playing defense. Leia closed the folder, her decision forming like a slow sunrise. Because the next move she made wouldn't just protect her, it would flip Ethan's entire world upside down. Her first step wasn't to call a lawyer. It was to call Julian. They met at the Foundation's office, sunlight pouring in through the tall windows. He listened without interrupting as she laid out everything Clara had told her, the folder sitting between them like a shared secret. When she finished, Julian leaned back in his chair. That's a loaded gun, Leia. Once you pull the trigger, there's no going back. Then let's make sure you win on all fronts. Not just legally, but publicly. If this gets messy, you need your story out there first. Step 2, prepare a public narrative, not a smear, but a clear, factual account of what happened to Clara and how Ethan's actions fit into a pattern. By the time she left the meeting, Leia felt like she was walking taller. It wasn't vanity, it was strategy. A new haircut, subtle makeup, and a fitted navy blazer transformed her from the quiet artist Ethan used to dismiss into someone ready to sit across from a news anchor and speak with authority. Not office, Leia replied, smiling for the first time in days. Just my life. That afternoon, she filmed a short, polished video statement in the Foundation's media room. She didn't mention Ethan's name, but anyone paying attention would connect the dots. By midnight, it had been shared over 200,000 times. Comments poured in from women who'd faced similar betrayals, thanking her for speaking up. But this time, there was nothing he could mock without looking small. And for the first time, Leia realized she wasn't just surviving him anymore. The days that followed felt different. The legal review came back solid. Releasing the truth too soon could let him spin it as a personal vendetta. Carla was with her nearly every day, helping sort through messages and plan her schedule. You're different, she said one evening as they sorted through a stack of speaking engagement requests. I feel different, Leia admitted. For the first time, I'm not reacting to him. I'm building something of my own. One little girl with paint on her cheeks asked, "Are you the lady on the big sign?" Leia laughed softly. I guess I am. No, Leia said, kneeling down to the child's level. But I am someone who didn't give up when people were mean to me. And you can be that, too. It reminded her why she was doing this, not just to win against Ethan, but to stand as proof that women could reclaim their dignity and rewrite their stories. By the end of the week, the plan was set. Julian would host a charity gala for the Arts Fund with key media outlets invited. Leia would speak briefly about the program, and then, without fanfare, the evidence folder would be handed to a trusted investigative journalist. It wasn't about spectacle. It was about precision. It no longer felt like a burden. She placed it in her bag and turned off the light. The night of the gala shimmered with the kind of opulence only New York could stage. Crystal chandeliers cast warm light over the grand ballroom, the air alive with the soft hum of conversation and the clink of champagne glasses. Guests arrived in tuxedos and gowns, drifting between art displays and silent auction tables. Leia stepped out of the car with Julian at her side, the cameras flashing instantly. She wore a sleek black gown, her hair swept up to reveal the simple diamond studs her mother had given her years ago. She didn't need anything more. Leia's speech was scheduled near the midpoint, just before the live auction. Leia walked to the podium, her heart steady despite the hundreds of eyes watching. "Good evening," she began, her voice calm but clear. "When I first picked up a paintbrush, I never imagined it would lead me here, to a room filled with people who believe art can change lives. This program isn't just about creativity. It's about dignity. It's about giving voices to those who have been silenced." She paused, letting the words settle. "I know what it means to be silenced, and I know what it takes to speak again." She didn't mention Ethan by name, but the weight of her words was unmistakable. Cameras from 2 news outlets were trained on her, recording every syllable. When she finished, the applause rose like a tide. Julian stepped forward to thank her, then smoothly transitioned to introducing the evening's special press partners. In the controlled chaos that followed, the evidence folder passed quietly from Leia's bag to the hands of investigative journalist Mara Green, known for her integrity and unwillingness to bow to pressure. Mara met Leia's gaze for a brief moment, a silent promise exchanged between them. Then she slipped the folder into her case and disappeared into the crowd. Across town, Ethan was at another event, blissfully unaware. In truth, he didn't want to share a room with Leia and Julian. That choice would cost him. By the time the live auction began, Leia's phone buzzed with a single text from Mara, "It's starting." Because while the ballroom sparkled with champagne and applause, the first draft of Ethan Bennett's public downfall was already being written. The story broke just after 9 p.m. While the gala guests were bidding on a signed painting, notifications began lighting up phones around the room. Mara Green's article had gone live on the front page of the Metropolitan Ledger. Exclusive, documents reveal Bennett Solutions secured landmark contract through fraudulent means. The headline was followed by scanned images of Ethan's annotated instructions to alter files, testimony from Marcy, and a detailed timeline of Clara Vaughn's forced exit. Some posts paired the article with photos of Leia at the gala that very night, calling it the quietest, sharpest revenge in history. Julian was mid-conversation when his phone buzzed. He glanced at the screen, then at Leia, his brow lifting just slightly. "It's out," he murmured. Then another, and another. Someone shoved a phone in his face, the glaring headline staring back at him. "Looks like someone finally caught up to you," the man replied before walking away. He excused himself, stepping into the hallway to call Dana, but she didn't answer. His mind spun through possibilities, scrambling for damage control. By 10 p.m., the story had snowballed. She didn't gloat. She didn't even bring it up. Her phone buzzed again, this time an unknown number. She opened the message. Because no matter what Ethan tried next, the truth was already out, and the story now belonged to her. By the end of the week, Ethan Bennett had stepped down as CEO of Bennett Solutions, citing personal reasons. Though no one said Leia's name aloud, she didn't need the credit. She still had bills to pay, doctor's appointments to keep, and the slow, steady reality of preparing for motherhood on her own. The weight that had lived on her chest for months was gone, replaced by a quiet sense of space to breathe, to create, to decide what she wanted next. One afternoon, as summer turned to early fall, Carla convinced Leia to take a walk through Central Park. The leaves had begun to change, splashes of gold and red filtering the sunlight. They found a bench overlooking the lake, and for a while, they just watched the rowboats drift by. "You know," Carla said, "you could have kept that folder closed. You could have ignored Clara's call, stayed quiet. But you didn't. You didn't just save yourself. You changed the game for everyone who's ever been in your shoes." "I'm just done being the background in my own life," Leia said softly. In the distance, the city skyline rose against the fading light. And for the first time in a long while, Leia knew the next chapter would be entirely hers to write. 3 years later, the pediatric wing of St. Luke's was filled with the bright, happy chaos of a spring afternoon. "Higher, Mommy," 4-year-old Lily said, her voice full of concentration. Leia smiled, steadying her daughter's hand. "That's perfect, sweetie." The Community Arts Fund had become a celebrated city institution, and Leia, its director, had found a calling she never knew she was looking for. A familiar, gentle hand rested on her shoulder. "I see we have a new master artist at work," Julian said, his eyes crinkling as he looked at Lily. He leaned down and kissed the top of Lily's head, then gave Leia a soft kiss that spoke of quiet Sunday mornings and a love built on trust, not spectacle. She hadn't just reclaimed her story, she had built a new one from the ground up, full of color, hope, and a quiet, unshakable joy. Ethan was a ghost of a memory, a footnote in a book she had long since finished reading. For more content that inspires and empowers, don't forget to hit that like button, share this video with someone who needs to hear it, and subscribe for our next story. You are not alone, and your chapter matters.